Hello and welcome to the Uncapped podcast, brought to you by Roasthouse Pub, one of Frederick's finest craft beer and culinary destinations, where great people come to drink amazing beer. Visit them to track their taps and menu at roasthousepub.com or download the digital pour app to track what's on tap. I'm your host, Chris Sands. This is episode 63, and helping me out this week with our very special guest is Liz Murphy from the amazing NapTown Pint.
Hi, thank you for having me back.
So not only did she drive out from Annapolis today, but also Peter Franchot, the Comptroller of Maryland, is here to talk about all of the great things that we are going to try to have happen this year for Maryland's breweries.
Actually, I just came out to say hi to Carly Ogden.
Oh, okay. Well, never mind. I guess we're done.
Yeah, no, she's such a firecracker because she obviously owns one of these great family-owned breweries, Attaboy Beer. It happens to make a Golden Fields beer that I really like, and I know that some of the connoisseurs are always critical of this beer or that beer, but I think it's great, and I wish her and her family well because they're struggling to do exactly what every other small craft brewery is doing, which is make great products, sell it to consumers, grow. Nothing's guaranteed to them. They only survive by their grit, smartness, and they put their own money into it. So yeah, I'm out here to check in with all of you guys. Liz obviously is a iconic figure in the craft brewing industry. Her NapTown Pint is one of the all-time great blogs, and it's very helpful, and I'm happy to be here with you, Chris, and answer any questions you have. Yeah, I drove up, but maybe I can get a beer at the end of the day.
Well, yes, because afterwards, I believe you have a few things you're doing today, but then this evening you'll be having a happy hour at Rockwell Brewery to talk about the Reform on Tap task force and the battle ahead.
Well, it's going to be a battle we win, I guarantee you that, because why wouldn't any reasonable person want to help these small family-owned businesses? They're being put upon by the out-of-state corporate beer interests and their folks that they control down in Annapolis, and they have ridiculous things on their top of their problems that they already have and challenges of making great beer and selling it and generating economic activity. Here's just one provision. If you're a small craft brewer in Maryland and you want to distribute the beer that you produce, and you have a tap room which is, for example, producing more than 2,000 barrels, and you may want to sell another 1,000 barrels at your tap room, you have to find a distributor, sign a contract with them, which is for life, let's be honest, because it's under the Maryland franchise law. And, for example, now under the new law, you have to take beer that you're allowed to sell another 1,000 barrels to your consumers, but only if you sell it to the distributor first. Have him come and pick it up and deliver it to his warehouse, put it down on the ground, jack the price up, and then bring it back to you and resell it to you. This is your beer that you produced with your labor. You want to sell it at your tap room. And there's a Maryland law that says, number one, you can never, ever separate from your agreement with this franchise person. Well, let's be honest, you can, but it's such a long divorce period.
Well, yeah, that's what I think.
You go out of business. So
I think for anyone listening that doesn't understand why that is, I think we should explain that there are ways to get out of it. It's a 90 day. Whatever.
180
it's
days.
So
it
180 days, but if you give notice to that distributor that you want to break your relationship during that 180 days, it's almost a guarantee they're not going to put any effort into selling your beer, which makes it a pretty unattractive route for a brewery to go.
I didn't mean to get down in the weeds so quickly.
But it tends to happen with this topic.
Seriously, this is just insane.
Well, I felt like that was one we needed to, though, because some people do that. I think that's one of the points that people often don't understand. But then another point I wanted to make is that it was during one of the Reform on Tap task force meetings where I can't remember who it was, but someone said it, if you just take the word beer and replace it with milk, that will illustrate just how ridiculous some of these laws are.
Well, look, and of course you have to have some regulations because
Yes.
beer is not milk. It's an alcoholic product. We vigilantly regulate the public safety and public health provisions of the alcohol law. That's my job as your comptroller. And, if anything, we get a better response from the craft brewers than we do from other folks. But that's not what's going on here. What's going on here is just raw protectionism, where these corporate interests are used to getting their own way. They don't want these craft brewers to flourish unless they're their craft brewers that they've bought. And they happen to have the votes in Annapolis to do just about anything. And it's a shame, but it puts us who are advocates for the craft brewing industry somewhat in a disadvantage when you look at it. But the reason I'm so optimistic about this is that, we have the most anti-competitive, anti-consumer craft beer system in the country. It's outrageous. And everybody else, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Virginia, D.C., they have none of this thicket of laws and regulations.
Right, and Pennsylvania is an extremely friendly state for, at least to the manufacturing side of it. It gets a little hairy as it goes down the chain, but for the manufacturing of it, it is a very friendly state for
So what I liked
breweries.
about Carly Ogden, I mentioned that at the beginning, she speaks truth to power, and she doesn't take any guff from these folks. And Flying Dog, I know recently backed off a $54 million expansion. That should never happen in the state of Maryland. We just need to get competitive with our regional partners, and then we need to advertise ourselves as one of the best states in the country to brew craft beer. Will it require some dynamite down there in Annapolis? Sure. But, hey, it's an election year.
So I actually want to go back to something that you mentioned briefly, because one of the things that has been interesting leading up to this session is the fact that we are basically drowning in editorial thought pieces about the 18,000 reasons why we should be holding craft brewers down and sort of keeping with the regulations we currently have in place. And the one that you mentioned is one that struck me recently, which is the public health argument, because alcohol-related deaths have been on the rise. But I would really love to hear from you in your words how what we're trying to do with the Reform on Tap Act of 2018 isn't at odds with public safety.
Well, I'm the chief alcohol regulator, and I'm in charge of enforcing a lot of the safety laws, underage drinking, and I do that very vigorously and very vigilantly. That's not what's going on here. What's going on here is, look, there's a set amount of beer that's going to be consumed in the state of Maryland. And right now, a lot of it is coming in from out of state. And what I'm suggesting is that Maryland craft-based brewery is much better for Maryland-based family-owned businesses, and it's much better for the Maryland state economy, where despite all of the disadvantages of our regulations and laws, we still have almost an $800 million sector here, producing 6,500 jobs, $258 million in wages for Marylanders. That money is local. It is when it's done like this in these American manufacturing breweries, it really promotes more economic activity than the out-of-state stuff. So when any legislator or any official stands up and says this is an issue not about competition and protectionism, it's an issue about public health and the kids, just substitute in there, no, it's really about the money for you guys, because every year the alcohol interests are shaken down by the legislative leaders down there in Annapolis. They make a living off of, well, it's not just the alcohol people, it's everybody is shaken down. And, these corporate interests have unfortunately set up shop, and they passed the bill that was the genesis of all of this revolution, I guess, on the behalf of the craft brewers. And I'm happy to be a champion. I love the fact that Liz and Chris, you and others are I'm speaking out on this, but there's no confusion. This is not a public health issue. This is just a raw political power issue, and that's why I think we're going to win.
Yeah, I would think if we were concerned about public health as it being the problem, that we'd be fighting to limit the sale of 40s of malt liquor instead of craft beer made in Maryland, because I'm sure there's a lot. There are a lot. If you want to make the argument that it's a public health issue, there are a lot worse things being sold in a store than a craft beer in the alcohol segment.
Yeah, and we're fought against powdered alcohol and caffeinated beer products and other alcohol products. That's not the issue at all. I obviously have a lot of respect for the public health community. That's not what this is about. This is not about more alcohol. This is about who produces it and who deserves a level playing field. And not what they are right now is under the thumb of their competition. And we're trying to level it out. If I have reason to be optimistic in the legislature, but we can always go to the people. Big elections this year.
I always found that the public health argument a little bit interesting as well, since I felt like during the Reform on Tap task force meetings, we heard quite a bit of, well, people aren't going to be consuming more alcohol, and that's just the way it is, so it's pointless to try to adjust the share of who is making what and when and why.
No, this is all about we have the status quo. We benefit financially from the status quo. We're not going to let you change it because we've made so many contributions to these powerful legislators in Annapolis. All we're doing is opening it up, letting a little sunlight in, and I think it will disinfect the place pretty fast. But there are a bunch of other priorities that everybody's looking at, including the tax reform bill and other things that we're heavily involved in. It's not to suggest that craft beer is not a priority for me. It is.
That's Carly has spent a decent amount of time on the internet posting a rundown of campaign contributions from Big Beer and from distributors, and the list is very long, and some of the numbers are pretty high. So I think it plays into exactly what you were saying, that there's definitely a lot of money that is coming into play of why this protectionism is taking place.
If anyone wants to know what's going on in Annapolis, follow the money.
And then
you said it, Chris, and there's a lot there. It's very unfortunate. It's part of politics, I guess. I obviously raise money as an elected official in order to keep my seat, but I like to think of myself as an independent person, not at the beck and call of somebody who just pulls out a dog whistle and tells me what to do.
And then I think a big like a side problem in this debate is that the breweries really most breweries have to walk this fine line of how much they say, because they have that for life relationship with the distributor that they want these laws changed with, because there's real recourse that they can face. And I think
that's why God created Liz Murphy and Carly Ogden.
Yeah, and I was going to say, and Carly is in this unique position where she doesn't mind speaking her mind 100%, and their business model doesn't rely on a distributor relationship. So she doesn't have to worry about who she offends by saying what. And we talked to them a decent amount yesterday, and the big part of what they're saying is because most of these laws and things, they don't affect them, but they're a big proponent of it's just not right. It's that they're in this fight because it's just not right.
Well, it does affect the state's economy, though.
Yes. So
why these elected officials attack these small family-owned businesses when they're not asking for money like everybody else in Annapolis. Everyone goes down there with their hand out and says, give us taxpayers' money. That's not what the breweries are doing. They're just saying, get out of our way. And so ultimately I think that will penetrate through, and we'll see some progress here. The two fundamental issues for me are that franchise law, that has to be turned into contract law, which is how the distilleries and the wineries operate with their distributors. That's the way the breweries should be able to do it. And then this buyback provision is something out of Stalin's Russia.
Yeah, that seems to be just one of the weirdest. I guess it must have been just a completely last-minute compromise that was.
No, it wasn't
put
a
in,
compromise. It's an example of them doing.
Or a fake compromise.
No, it's a perfect example of Annapolis where they do something like this just because they can. And it's a message, which is you either knuckle under and shut up and stop complaining, or we're really going to put you out of business. And it's phony because they don't have the power they think they do. Only a couple of these folks in Annapolis. So the rank and file delegates and senators hopefully will get the message and not just march along in lockstep without supporting Carly and her cohorts all over the state. I mean, I feel like I'm in ground zero up here in Frederick County.
It's the East Coast capital of craft beer.
Yeah, well, God bless Frederick County, Frederick City, and everything else.
I find it interesting that, especially with the buyback provision, because again, the arguments, depending on who you're talking to, shift all over the place as to why something is good or bad or neutral. But when it came to the buyback provision, I remember I read somewhere Delegate Derek Davis talking about, well, it doesn't matter, nobody's really getting near the limits anyway, so why are we having this conversation? And I had a great conversation with Alec Ross, who's a Democratic candidate for governor, and he put it so well when he said, well, of course nobody's ever going to butt up against the limits, because just by virtue of the fact that they exist, they're never going to build out. It's completely financially irresponsible to build out infrastructure that would allow you to even get close.
Sure, and we talked about Flying Dog putting off or putting on permanent hold its expansion. That's part of it right there, because they don't have confidence they're going to be able to do what they want to do. How about Union Craft in Baltimore City, where we desperately need manufacturing jobs to get all of the challenges that Baltimore City dealt with? They just bought a 140,000 square foot former Sears Roebuck distribution facility. It's a craft brewery. Yeah. 140,000 square foot warehouse in the middle of a very challenged neighborhood of Baltimore that would never, ever see what this brewery is going to do from any other American enterprise, because it's so off the beaten path. Anyway, they were going to put a very large tap room in. Now they're putting a much smaller tap room in based on what the legislature has signaled with the legislation last year.
Yeah, because even with what they are doing, it's a huge leap of faith. Because if with the shaky ground, it's a leap of faith that it's going to turn out well for them.
All I'm saying is this brouhaha in Annapolis has an impact on the state's economy. Instead of an $800 million economic sector, these craft brewers could be double, triple, or quadruple that. And the jobs could also double, triple, and quadruple. Why aren't we saying, hey, this is great. It's you guys who are risking things. There's no guarantee that you make a beer and you have a company and you distribute it that people are going to like it and that you're going to succeed. So this is called capitalism. It's kind of a funny system, but don't you think we should let it exist here rather than coming in and saying, oh, no, you guys all have to knuckle under, or you have to do this, this, and this. Oh, and by the way, just to show you that we can do anything we want, we're going to put in some of these stupid things like the buyback provision. And we're not going to listen to you about the franchise law because, well, why should we? We have you under our thumb.
Well, I love that you brought up the union collective expansion, too, because while it's a negative, they've had to be somewhat more restrained in their growth footprint of what they were going to put in there with their tap room. But at the same time, I think what they're doing there speaks to why Maryland craft breweries are so wonderful for the community, because I think one thing that we should mention here is that the space that they're moving into is not just for them. They are actually creating a space for Baltimore makers and creatives to be able to sell locally created products to the community at large. And I think that's something that's very special. They could have just as easily picked a larger space to put their brewery in, but instead they made the conscious community-focused decision to create a space for them and for others that are, many of them, not alcohol-related whatsoever.
No, I can't wait to visit the new bakery.
Yeah, exactly.
So the point that I was trying to make, and Liz, I think you and Chris recognize this, is that it could be so much greater if we could just recognize their entrepreneurship and understand that the impediments that we're putting in their way don't make any sense. And they could easily be an ordinary set of voters that sat down and looked at this situation would say, oh, it's pretty obvious. You just have to level the playing field and let these people engage in the free enterprise system. That's supposedly what we have. Once again, I'll take care of the public safety issues, the regulations that protect the public interest. That's not what this is about. This is a bunch of special interests who have wormed their way into Annapolis. And it's not the legislators telling the lobbyists what to do. It's the lobbyists telling the legislators what they're going to do and barely giving them time to even read the bill. They just put it in front of them and say, vote for it.
Let's take a real quick break to thank Roasthouse Pub, and then I'd like to get into maybe some more specifics of the Reform on Tap Act, and then you can let me know when your hard out is, then we make sure we end on time.
Well, we're going to bore people to death.
No one's going to be bored. But once again, thank you, Roasthouse Pub. They have a couple amazing things coming up. The Kushwa Beer Dinner, which, if you've never been to one of Roasthouse Pub's beer dinners, absolutely you should go. They are amazing. And on January 30th, Kushwa will be the featured beer. I don't think the menu's been posted yet, but I'm sure, as with every one of them, it'll be great. And tickets are currently available. On January 25th, Mom's Spaghetti Dinner Night will be a battle between Monoxy Brewing and Diamondback Brewing Company. And once again, thank you, Roasthouse Pub. I think the last time you were on, you went and had lunch or dinner at the Roasthouse Pub.
Fabulous place. And I love Frederick because it's such a, zesty environment full of these craft brewers, craft wineries, craft distilleries. This is the future for a big chunk of Maryland manufacturing. We keep talking about, whatever happened to manufacturing? Where are the steel companies? Hey, these are the steel companies of the future.
And one thing about Frederick in general is that it is a lot of it's built a lot on small businesses. There are a lot of small locally owned businesses in Frederick, and I think in a lot of this debate, that's something that may get lost sometimes, is that they keep everyone just saying breweries, but really they are small businesses that are just asking for, as you've said multiple times, a level playing field to battle the Goliaths of the huge corporations that have stacked the deck against them.
No, that's a good public interest. We want to promote small businesses. That's what I do as comptroller. Obviously, I'm the tax collector, but I also promote small businesses. That's 70% of the state's economy. Now, not breweries just alone, but they're part of that sector. So why not reach out and help them, particularly when they are the subject of such a cynical attack as House Bill 1283 was at the end of last session. That's what got my goat. And, I was in the legislature for many years. I understand exactly what's going on, and needs a good dose of sunlight and a good involvement by average voters who say, this is Maryland. We're not going to put up with these special interests coming in and ruining something which is potentially very beneficial for the state's economy.
So there's two things I think we want to talk about. One, there's the petition. There's the petition that we want to ask people, if you believe in supporting the craft breweries, to go on to I think probably the best place to find it is go to the Reform on Tap Task Force, Reform on Tap Facebook page, and then they go on, sign this petition to show your support for the comptroller's initiative to back the breweries.
Yeah, they can go, Chris, to www.marylandtaxes, spelled out, Maryland spelled out, taxes, taxes.com, and there's an icon there to sign the petition. We're trying to get 6,500 signatures by February 1st. That's the number of jobs that are currently represented in the state of Maryland by craft brewers, and that, once again, is just the beginning. So we urge everybody to go online and do the right thing and at least sign up and indicate support for the petition that we're going to deliver.
When do you guys plan on announcing the petition results?
February 1st.
And that's the kickoff of February, the Maryland Craft Brewers Month?
I believe it is.
Yes.
Yeah, there we go.
What
about this for an idea? Why don't we take Maryland crafted alcohol products, spirits, wine, and beer, these wonderful family-owned wineries and distilleries and breweries, give them a week tax-free to sell their products to Marylanders. Hey, by the way, here's something that's really cool, and it really helps us a lot. You buy a bottle of Bud Light made God knows where in St. Louis somewhere. That is useless as far as economic activity in the state of Maryland. All that money goes back out of the state. Maybe a little bit goes to some small distributorship somewhere. But, you buy a locally brewed craft beer and you're doing something for the state's economy. It's the patriotic thing to do is buy local.
It's Flying Dog now in their tap room has a big graphic up on the wall explaining the difference to buying anything produced locally, the amount of impact that has on your local community as opposed to purchasing something that's been manufactured elsewhere. And it's as you said, it's a drastic difference. If you want to help,
I love that guy, Jim Caruso. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm going to get him an armed escort though, because he's like speaking truth to power.
Yes, and, he's not one to bite his tongue.
And they moved from Colorado.
Yeah. 2007.
I hope I never see the day that any of it moves out of Maryland.
So the press release for the Reform on Tap Act is a 12-point things that you want to accomplish. When I guess the first question is, when do we expect to see that legislation put forth?
Well, the legislation has been drafted. It's been introduced. There are meetings going on. I'll be meeting with some of the legislative leaders, other folks. There's an excellent, obviously the Brewers Trade Association has hired lobbyists. These are lobbyists that have white hats on. But they're good, they're professional, and everybody's going to get lined up. And I assume that the legislature will objectively consider the 12-pack of reforms, and we'll get a vote on each and every one of them. And that's all I'm really asking. I assume if there is a vote that they will all pass because they're not radical. They're just common sense, free enterprise, capitalists, leveling the playing field, as Liz was saying. So we'll see. There's a lot of gossip and kind of commentary going on, but that's typical. Mm-hmm. That's typical for Annapolis.
Well, yeah, there's definitely been the bluster from Representative Bush coming out publicly attacking.
Should the alcohol regulator regulate alcohol?
Yeah.
That's really kind of the question.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. And we've done a darn good job, as I mentioned, because I've got a terrific enforcement division in my agency, and we pay a lot of attention. We regulate petroleum and tobacco also. And these are important issues. I mean, I'm sensitive to them because drunk driving, underage driving, these are public interest issues. But to suggest that somehow that they are part of this debate is very unfortunate, but typical of Annapolis, because they never want to talk about the real reason, which is that they're doing the bidding of people that have essentially got the legislature by the throat.
So the only question I really have about this, and again, this is more of a devil's advocate question, but when you look through the bullet points that you have in the Reform on Tap Act, a lot of it is no limits, no limits, no limits. In fact, I remember the name of the publication when this was introduced was called A World Without Limits. And some have said that the idea of no limits as part of a banner head for this legislation really, again, comes up against the idea that alcohol is, in fact, a regulated product and you can't have those two exist together.
Well, that's their point, I guess.
Yeah.
But my point is that the opposition is completely disingenuous because it's all about money and special interests and who benefits from the current system and how do we maintain and preserve that at all costs. And now that we've established that we can preserve it, the big beer interests, let's teach these little upstarts a lesson. Mm-hmm. Let's put in that buyback provision because not only does it not make any sense, obviously it generates all sorts of ridicule, but who cares? Because we can do it. We have the power. Well, let's see.
So that you've mentioned that one, and you've mentioned the franchise law.
Correct.
Are those the two of the 12 parts of the 12 pack that you consider the most important to take care of right now?
Well, they're the two priorities for me because they're the most onerous parts and
Yeah.
they're the easiest to communicate how absurd this situation is.
And those
for
two
the
are
state.
ones that are actively affecting people.
So
whereas-
those are good. But the other 10, I'd like the whole 12-pack to pass because why shouldn't local authorities regulate the hours of operation for the tap room?
Yeah.
I mean, once again, this is not some kind of done deal. When people enter into this business, they make a lot of money. They don't. They have to have a tap room. They have to have normal hours at the tap room. All they're selling is their own beer.
Well, it's funny you say that because Graham and I were at one of Maryland's larger craft breweries over the weekend, and there was a brewer from another brewery there, and they were talking, and I can't remember how it even came up, but the one owner said that it's like, a lot of people think that we make a ton of money, and the other guy just laughed. He's like, actually, really, at the end of the year, I made a lot of beer.
Yeah,
Yeah, no
like,
kidding.
we're not really making a lot of money. We're making a whole lot of beer.
Well, that's the joke. You talked to Justin Bonner at a Jailbreak. Yes, you go into craft beer for fame and fortune,
Yeah.
and then everybody just starts laughing about and then commiserating about how they're never home.
Well, hats off to those folks because they employ Marylanders. They generate tax revenue at the state and local level, which pays for education and all these things we care about. They persevere despite these absurd restrictions on them. And they're willing to – they're not – you're right. They're a little bit constrained by the fact that they're dependent for their existence on the people who I'm attacking. Well, I'm happy to help out. And I applaud every one of them who were involved in this, even a little bit, because it's dangerous for them. They've invested and risked everything in many instances, and they are under the thumb of these out-of-state people and their lobbyists. Well, maybe we can change it this year.
What I think you alluded to, it is a very big election year this year. So if you are someone, and I imagine if you are watching or listening to this, you love craft beer as much as we do, and you love the people who produce it. They're great people.
Let me appeal directly to everybody. I don't care if you voted for Hillary Clinton or for Donald Trump. That's not the issue. The issue is beer. Craft beer.
Yes.
It's wonderful.
It's the great equalizer.
Put down your cudgels on other issues and all the frustration you feel, A, B, and C. Just forget it and focus in on this. Go in and sign this petition. Get other people to sign it. Come down to Annapolis. Help us at the hearings. Speak truth to power.
Call your representatives. Let them know you support small businesses getting a fair shake.
I do have one question, though, and
Sure.
this is one I've actually gotten quite a bit, which is, we saw a groundswell of grassroots consumer support once people started realizing what was happening with House Bill 1283 last year. And I'm curious, what would you say to craft beer enthusiasts who want to explain the importance of this issue to people who may not be craft beer drinkers?
Well, tell them that this is the fastest growing form of manufacturing in the state of Maryland that exists. I mean, beer is manufactured at these 85 craft breweries, and it's every bit as much manufacturing as Bethlehem Steel was. And there are a lot of jobs, a lot of economic activity. That's what we're trying to promote. We want our state to be economically viable.
Not only that, it helps our local farmers as well. I mean,
Well,
fundamentally, at the end of the day, beer is an agricultural product.
Well, and more and more of the people that I have come in and talked to, the whole infrastructure has grown enough in Maryland for producing hops and malted barley. Now there are maltsters in Maryland that are producing a good enough product that a normal thing for almost everyone that comes in and says is that they are making more and more Maryland sourced beers that they're helping the agriculture in Maryland also.
Absolutely. But here's the real argument. Pennsylvania, Virginia, Delaware, D.C. would love to have all our breweries. They would roll the red carpet out for them. They've already been over here recruiting them based on what the legislature did. So, guys, wake up down there, correct the damage that you did, level out the playing field. You're not giving any advantage to the craft brewers. You're just letting them, as I say, do what they're good at, making great beer. But we're not putting ourselves where Maryland is some kind of unattractive, unwelcoming place for craft brewers, surrounded by states that are over here saying, hey, come over. If they don't like you, come over to us.
Yeah. And I think to answer your previous question is that not only supporting agriculture, but everyone likes people to be employed.
Jobs are good.
There was 6,541 jobs currently. And as every brewery is growing, those are more and more jobs. And they're jobs across the spectrum. Mm-hmm. Sales jobs, quality control jobs, to packaging and...
No, that's great, Chris. But here's another great reason. Millennials, people in their 20s and 30s who are very mobile and live all over the country and frankly could live anywhere they want because that's just the millennial generation. They love craft beer. Why not advertise the state as a mecca for these folks to come, and both as tourists and sample our products, but also as entrepreneurs if they want to open a brewery themselves. Instead, we'll put a big neon sign up out there, in Cumberland on the border saying, don't come to Maryland. We don't want you. And the legislature stands there like, somebody with their thumb in a pie wondering, gee, why is that? Well, it's because of what you guys did. So roll up your sleeves, do your job, get in there and fix it. And, the world is just so, I talked about the world without limits. It is without limits economically. And we need to just give them that little bit of TLC, and we'll be okay as a state. And I think there will be all sorts of millennials coming to Maryland and locating here either as residents or as entrepreneurs because of what we do about craft beer.
Well, look at Salisbury. That's the perfect case study. I mean, they've seen the median age drop in the town of Salisbury where Evolution is located. I remember Mayor Jake Day, he did that wonderful presentation at the first task force meeting talking about how Evolution Craft was an integral part of the revitalization of Salisbury as a place where people don't want to leave when they grow up. They want to come back.
Whenever I'm in a Maryland community that's a little bit on its heels economically, I say get a distillery, get a brewery, get a winery, an urban winery. Put it in here. It'll be a catalyst for strengthening your community.
I think that is the perfect note to end on. So thank you so much for coming out and talking to us. Thank you, Liz, for coming and helping me out. Everyone, go talk to your legislators. Show your support for the craft beer industry. And thank you, everyone, for watching and listening. Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers, Liz and Chris. Thank you.